Hello, everyone. Thank you all so much for being here. I just wanted to start by saying that there is live transcript closed captioning available to you. If you click on the closed captioning button up in the top toolbar, you'll be able to turn that on if you'd like to use it. Thank you all again for joining us this evening. My name is Siri, and I'll be here as your host for tonight's Inquiry Series, a virtual speaker series designed to explore inclusivity. This program features sessions with leaders from the outdoor recreation and education sector who are paving the way towards a more diverse and inclusive outdoor community. Before we dive into tonight's session, I wanted to let you all know that we are recording this webinar to be shared for further viewing on our website. For tonight, I am so excited to welcome our guest, Syren Nagakyrie from Disabled Hikers. Syren is a longtime disabled activist and community builder who is committed to an outdoors culture transformed by fair representation, accessibility, and justice for people who are often marginalized in the outdoors. They are the author of The Disabled Hiker's Guide to Western Washington and Oregon, Outdoor Adventures Accessible by Car, Wheelchair, and Foot, to be published by FalconGuides. There will be time at the end of tonight's webinar for Q&A, so please feel free to submit questions with the Q&A button, and I will make sure to ask them during that part of the session. So without further ado, welcome, Syren. Take it away.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm really excited to be here and to share this time in this space with everyone. Again, I'm Syren Nagakyrie, they, them pronouns, and I'm the founder of Disabled Hikers. Disabled Hikers was started in March of 2018, and we build disability community and justice in the outdoors. So I thought I would start with a short video to tell you a little bit more about myself and what I do in the organization. In nature, nothing is perfect and everything is perfect. Alice Walker.
A forest of tall green trees. Next, Syren sits on a moss-covered log in Olympic National Park.
Hi, I'm Syren Nagakyrie. I use she and they pronouns, but please refer to me as they. I have multiple invisible disabilities and identify as a white, queer, gender-fluid person from a poor and working-class background. My family includes many people with disabilities. As a child, I spent hours outside, sitting under a tree or gazing at the moon. I noticed how different the plants and animals were from each other. This awareness helped me feel less isolated. I sensed that even though I was different from the other kids, I had a place in the world. It took me a long time to feel comfortable exploring what my body could do, and it wasn't until my mid-20s that I started to experience outdoor recreation. But I quickly realized that few people really understood disability or knew how to provide the kind of transparent information and support that I needed to participate in an activity. People would tell me I didn't belong if I couldn't participate like everyone else. They said I needed to push through or stay behind. It was hard. I was reckoning with my own internalized ableism and need for connection and healing, and experiencing daily harm and isolation caused by ableism in the community. In the spring of 2018, my years of frustration came to a head. I had recently moved to the Olympic Peninsula and was spending hours researching hikes. I decided to attempt a trail that was easy, but as soon as I started, I encountered steep stairs and a narrow, rocky path along a steep drop-off. It put me in a dangerous situation, and none of this information had been listed in any of the guides that I read. I did reach my destination, exhausted and in pain, and as I rested at the waterfall, I was inspired to start my organization, Disabled Hikers.
Syren walks down a forest path using a cane.
Disabled Hikers writes detailed trail guides and leads supportive group hikes in an effort to build community for disabled people in the outdoors. By providing detailed information up front and removing the pressure to keep up with the group, we help people feel supported. Folks are encouraged to take a break or turn back whenever needed, and decisions about the route are made as a group. There is mounting evidence that time in nature provides a range of benefits, including physical exercise, emotional well-being, and a sense of belonging. This is why access to the outdoors is so important. And yet people who need these benefits the most, the disability community, face the most barriers to accessing the outdoors. The good news is we don't have to summit a mountain to gain these benefits. You can enjoy nature through your window, on a park bench with a friend, or by noticing the plants and animals on your daily commute. You can experience nature wherever you are. But disabled people should not be excluded from outdoor recreation just because non-disabled people think we don't belong there.
A sign reads Madison Creek Falls Trail with an accessibility symbol.
There are really simple changes that can be made to outdoor spaces, such as improved audio and visual signage,
an audio description device at the trailhead.
Welcome to Olympic National Park. This unit provides audio description for the 2 exhibit panels at this location.
widening and smoothing paths, and removing barriers. Even if physical changes aren't possible, clear information about the accessible and inaccessible features is so important so that disabled folks can make their own informed decisions. Disability is one of the most natural experiences, and nature mirrors that in so many ways. As Alice Walker says, nothing and everything is perfect.
Syren waves next to a sign that reads Olympic National Park, Elwha Valley.
Please join me in advocating for improved accessibility and information for disabled people in the outdoors, so that we can all enjoy everything that nature has to offer. Learn more at rootedinrights.org/accessnature. Written and directed by Syren Nagakyrie. Special thanks to Olympic National Park and the Quinault, Quileute, and S'Klallam, who are the first peoples of this land.
Produced by Rooted in Rights.
All right. Did a quick location change to account for barking dog. In this presentation, we're going to talk a little bit about types of disabilities and disability language and culture, and then spend a little time on the type of information that disabled people need to be able to enjoy the outdoors. There will be a couple of slides that ask you to reflect on a couple of questions, and you're welcome to spend some time in the chat sharing about that during that time if you'd like. And then I'm hoping to leave plenty of time for a Q&A and conversation at the end. So let's start right in by discussing types of disabilities. And I think for a long time, people's understanding of disability has been really limited to mobility disabilities, which is what this graphic kind of represents. It shows people using wheelchairs, walkers, canes, and things like that. But not all disabilities are physical, and not all disabilities are visible either. So there's the ADA definition of a disability is any physical or mental impairment that substantially limits one or more major life activities. And an invisible disability is any disability that is not immediately apparent. So that means if you're just looking at someone, you may or may not immediately recognize, oh, that person has a disability. And this can include chronic illnesses, autoimmune conditions, pre-existing health conditions, among many others. And this is going to become increasingly important, I feel like, as we're moving through this pandemic and as we kind of address some of the lingering effects of COVID and how that has impacted people in a lot of ways who may now be experiencing some long-term chronic conditions that they had not before. And what is that going to mean for them and how they experience the outdoors? And is that really going to be kind of expanding our disability community? So there's a lot of language used when talking about disability that may be unfamiliar. You may have heard of two different kind of terms about how people identify as disabled. That's identity first or person first. And identity first is using language like disabled person or blind, deaf, autistic. Person first is saying things like person with a disability, person who is hearing impaired, boy with autism. So identity first places the disability as an essential component of identity. Person first places the person before the disability. And I personally use identity first language because disability is a really core component of who I am and how I experience the world. For me, it's a way of really identifying myself. I don't see it as a label. It's more descriptive of myself and who I am. And it's it's a necessary part of the struggle for representation and justice for me. But some people feel like person first language emphasizes the person over the disability, while others argue that person first language implies that being a person means being able-bodied, or we wouldn't need the additional descriptor. For example, we don't say, person without a disability or person with abilities when referring to someone who isn't disabled. But the most important thing to keep in mind is that really we need to respect the individual's choice. And even within the disability community, this is really a subject of conversation. And however an individual chooses to identify is perfectly fine. And you should always use that when referring to that person. But when talking about disability in general, I usually encourage people to perhaps alternate between identity first and person first. But in many ways, identity first is becoming more of the accepted terminology. But that is also, of course, really dependent on the type of disability, and is also really dependent, I feel like, on how much stigma is around that disability. So, for example, when it comes to mental illness, a lot of people who have a mental illness will prefer person first and will prefer using person first language when talking about mental illness. So, it just, it's really respecting what that individual wants. And euphemisms are used a lot, unfortunately. And these are terms like differently abled or handicapable or special needs or diverse abilities. Basically, a euphemism is any term that is used in place of what the word actually is. So by using a euphemism, we're avoiding using the word disability, which then implies that disability or disabled is a bad word or something to be ashamed of, which is not the case at all. So I really encourage people to avoid euphemisms at all. Using these euphemisms implies that there's some normal level of disability, normal level of ability, and disabled people are different and separate from that. And so it really, again, it reinforces disability as abnormal and shameful. Most euphemisms they were not created by the disability community. They were created by non-disabled people, organizations, and governments to find a softer way to talk about disability. And they then became, adopted by other organizations. So. Outdated terms, these come up a lot as well, and they really need to be removed from the lexicon. Things like handicapped, wheelchair bound, suffers from. Again, these words really imply that disability is a bad thing. A person with disability is not handicapped. They're not necessarily limited. They have a disability. Someone is not bound to their wheelchair. A wheelchair is a source of mobility and freedom from them. Ableist language, unfortunately, is really, really embedded in our common language and in the lexicon. So things like crazy, insane, blind eye, lame are often used just in regular conversations. So things like, oh, can you believe this crazy weather? Or I had an insane weekend. Or if people turn a blind eye to racism, or gosh, that was so lame for that person to do that. Things like that really, what it's doing is pulling on misconceptions and stigmas about disability and taking those negative connotations and applying it to someone else. So it's really kind of reinforcing those negative connotations in conversations. And reclaimed words, a lot of words that were previously used as slurs have been reclaimed by some portions of the disability community. So you may see them being used. It is almost always not okay for someone who is not disabled to use these words. But it's also not okay if you see a disabled person using them to say, oh, that's not an acceptable term, because these are reclaimed words that have now been used to, it's really more of a source of power of reclaiming those slurs. So things like crip, mad, sick, those are often used within disability communities. So you may see those coming up. So how do we talk about lack of disability, people who aren't disabled? Our language really kind of assumes that not having a disability is the norm, and it makes disability the exception. So being just really conscious about what language we're using and how we are talking about ability and disability, and what assumptions we are making about who it is we are speaking to, and what people's abilities and disabilities are. So one of the things I often see come up is conversations about the word of non-disabled versus able-bodied. And able-bodied really refers specifically to someone who does not have a physical disability or a mobility impairment. Non-disabled refers more to disability in general. So it's someone who does not have any kind of disability. So if we're using able-bodied as kind of the catch-all term for someone who does not have a disability, really that's saying that the only kind of disability is a physical one, and that is not true. So non-disabled is really the more appropriate kind of catch-all term, and able-bodied is more specific for someone who does not have a physical disability. So being really specific about who it is that you're talking about, again, is really important. So saying things like a person, use sighted for someone who is not blind, hearing for someone who's not deaf, ambulatory for people who can walk, allistic or non-autistic for people who aren't autistic, and neurotypical for people who aren't neurodivergent. But one note, the term neurotypical, there's a lot of conversation around that too, about how that may place a certain type of neurology as the norm. So you may see that term shifting as well. So disability really impacts all of us. And I'll give you a few statistics here real quick. 20%, up to 26% of the population is estimated to have some kind of disability, and that may include chronic illness, multiple comorbidities, things like that. But those rates are actually much higher among Indigenous and Black populations. For example, Native Americans have a rate of 3 in 10. Black Americans have 1 in 4. White Americans are 1 in 5. Native Hawaiian or Pacific Islander is 1 in 6, and Asian is 1 in 10. And of course, as you may imagine, this is largely tied to the effects of historic and ongoing trauma, police violence, lack of access to healthcare, and other systemic and social factors that really impacts the rates of disability, and how often a disability is acquired versus a disability being something that you are born with. So this is why disability justice is something that, so you have the disability rights movement, which is something that I think more people are probably familiar with. That's the movement that brought things like Americans with Disabilities Act and some of those other legislative roles. But disability justice really acknowledges that everyone can experience ableism as a result of systemic structures that place value on a person's body and ways of being in the world. So it really addresses intersectionality and addresses race, class, gender, immigration, incarceration, and many other issues as that comes into play with disability. So all of us have access needs. We all have things that we need to do or have access to be able to interact with the world, to feel comfortable with the world, to be able to meet our body's needs. It's just that some of those needs have been much more normalized and accepted, whereas other needs have not been. So before we shift to talking about trails and access information, I wanted to give you a moment to think about what information is important to you before you enter a trail. What are your access needs? What do you expect to be there or need to be there before you start a new trail? I'll just give you a moment to kind of think about that. You're welcome to chat amongst yourselves if you like. Yeah, so I see things like elevation gain, directional signs, distance, terrain, elevation. So I wanted to give you a couple of case studies to review couple of trails where the information that is provided is maybe not that helpful or that accurate. Most of these are from the Olympic Peninsula, where I am typically based, and a lot of it is within Olympic National Park. And I want to say I have worked with them extensively over the last couple of years to both address some of these accessibility issues and also to improve the access to information. And they now have on their accessibility page on their website really extensive trail guides for many of these trails and basically all of the front country trails in the park. So that's definitely something to check out. That's an improvement you want to make. So the first one is Cape Flattery, Washington. This is the most northwestern point of the contiguous United States. It's a 3/4 mile trail. And it's listed as easy on all of the guides. If you talk to someone, they're like, oh, that's a super easy trail, you should go check it out. But it has 200 feet of elevation change in a 3/4 mile and over 100 steps on boardwalk. So that's really not going to be easy for anyone who has mobility issues. And then views at the end require climbing up a really steep ladder or stepping up to the edge of a cliff to be able to see anything. So again, if you have some vertigo or balance issues or any of that, that's really not going to be very accessible for you. And then the Olympic Coast beaches, basically the entire coastline is inaccessible for a good majority of people. All of the trailheads and access points have accessibility problems. It's really steep, slippery. You have to climb over lots of large drift logs. There's really no accessible overlooks or paths. The ones that are there are really short and they have really overgrown views. So, it's accessible to what you get to see a wall of green shrubs, and that's about it. And then there's a lot of kind of meaningless and outdated language, things like accessible with assistance that doesn't have any legal definition. And if something requires assistance to be able to access it, it is not accessible. Accessible means that someone who wants to enjoy that trail can do it on their own. So I wanted to give you a quick overview of the kind of information that Disabled Hikers provides in our trail guides. A lot of this is given in more detail on the website, and I think actually they had that up and can show it to you. So this is a Disabled Hiker spoon rating system. This is a system that is designed to provide more accurate and objective information about a trail that both takes into consideration the overall accessibility, the quality of the trail, how easy it is to get to, and all those other components.
Hey, Syren,
so
we can still see your presentation slides.
Let's see. How's that?
Perfect. Great. Thank you.
Yeah, so here's the spoon rating system, and this is based on an understanding of spoon theory, which is, again, an aspect of disability culture. The spoon theory is basically a way to understand the limited amount of energy that someone who is chronically ill or disabled has in a day. So you may start with 5 spoons in a day, And those are all the spoons that you have to be able to accomplish an activity. So every time you do something, say you bathe and get dressed for work, that's a spoon. You cook your meals, that's a spoon. You commute to your job, that's a spoon. So it's maybe it's a little awkward of a symbol, but it really is just a way to help understand that limited amount of energy. So that is pulled into this rating system here. So one spoon would be considered kind of the easiest of the trails, and that's something that's going to be entirely level, paved, under 2 miles, really easy to access, and it is probably wheelchair accessible. The thing with wheelchair accessibility, as you may know, is that a lot of trails may be listed as accessible and they really aren't. And wheelchair accessibility doesn't mean just one thing. All wheelchairs are different, all wheelchair users are different. So someone who's using a standard manual wheelchair will not be able to access the same kind of trail as someone who's using an adaptive wheelchair. So that is kind of included in here. A 2 spoon, again, is level but not paved, 1 to 3 miles. Access takes a little planning. 3 spoons is something that has really short and gentle elevation changes, mostly a dry, compact trail. It's 2 to 4 miles, but it's not going to be necessarily accessible to a wheelchair. And then 4 spoons is elevation changes over 500 feet or longer than a half a mile. The trail is often muddy or has other obstacles. 3 to 5 miles, and this is going to require more advanced planning or some basic trail map reading. You'll need access to perhaps a trail sign or carrying a basic map with you. 5 spoon is going to be the most difficult. These are elevation changes of 1,000 feet or longer than a mile. Trail has lots of obstacles and requires really extensive planning or map reading. This may be, for example, a backcountry trail. Okay, so this is the type of information that most disabled folks need to be able to decide if they can attempt a trail or not. So we need to talk about how we're going to get there and where is the location. So really detailed directions to the trailhead, the type of roadway, including how curvy, narrow, or bumpy it's going to be. That's really important if you're someone who has back pain or you're driving an accessible van. Are you going to be able to navigate that van on the road? If you're someone who has difficulty understanding directions, having really clear information about that. And then, of course, the available amenities at the trailhead, if there's restrooms, water, accessible picnic areas, and how many parking spots are available. And then it's really important to note if cell phone service is available. I know, kind of the idea is that, oh, we're going off the grid and want to be outdoors, but having cell service is really important if you're someone who has health considerations and want to be able to call for help if you need it. And then the overall trail design that includes the slope, width, and surface of the trail, how many obstacles are going to be on that trail, and then details on boardwalks, bridges, and stairs. And that includes the length of those surfaces and how tall the rise is, the grade, and general description of those. And then note if there are any benches and places to rest. Even if there's a really nice log that's fallen down that someone could rest on, that's something that is really important for me in particular. If I can't rest on a hike, then it's very unlikely I'll be able to do it. And then a lot of people give just the total elevation change, but it's really important to give that information for every single change that happens, not just overall. And then if it's a loop trail, to be really clear about which direction you're traveling. And then again, if there's multiple segments, provide that information for each segment. Then if you are doing a difficulty rating, be really specific and as objective as possible about what that difficulty actually means. Otherwise, it's really just isn't going to be very helpful. Switch back over here. And again, all this is on the website if you want to take a look again. So here's another question for you to think about briefly. In what ways do you trust your body and your surroundings to support you in being outdoors? And I ask this because as a disabled person, I am personally always thinking about what my body does or can do to allow me to be outdoors, what it can't do. And I have to consider the ways that outdoor culture excludes me, how safe I'm going to be in the outdoors. And for me, my biggest safety concern is not necessarily, is there going to be a bear? It's who is going to be out there with me? Who am I likely to encounter? What people are going to be around me? You know, I often joke, although it's not really a joke, that for me, the scariest sound is the sound of like dude bros laughing in the woods. You know, that is like, you know, that makes me just kind of, you know, really puts my skin up, you know, and makes me ask myself, I'm going to be okay. You know, I don't have the privilege of necessarily trusting that all these things are going to support me in the outdoors. So I think really thinking about how outdoor recreation is designed for you and how safe you feel and how much you can trust your surroundings and your body is really important to think about. So a few ways to support disabled people in the outdoors. I am really a big proponent of really, we have to change the culture, right? Like we can talk about accessibility all we want. We can make accessible paths and accessible campsites and all those things. But what is that going to mean if we're not actually changing the culture that makes people feel excluded? So changing the outdoor narrative and thinking about how we discuss being outdoors and our outdoor adventures, you know, bagging a 14K peak or through hiking a continental trail is not inherently better than going out for an easy day hike. So, you know, just really being mindful of that. Many of those narratives are based in colonial perceptions of land, and which is also very ableist. So, yeah, again, just really thinking about that. And, you know, for a lot of us, we may experience a temporary disability at some point in our lives. We may break a leg or become really sick. And, you know, I often see conversations talking about, oh, you know, now I'm injured and I can't go hike. I'm not a real hiker. And that's not true at all. If you're out hiking, you're a hiker. So just really thinking about how it is we define outdoor recreation. And avoiding inspiration porn. This is a term that kind of, I think, puts people on edge. Inspiration porn is basically coined by Stella Young. And these are stories about a disabled person accomplishing a hike or other activity that would be considered less remarkable if the person wasn't disabled. You know, if they weren't disabled and, you know, they went on this hike or climbed this mountain, would that necessarily be a major news story? You know, so it's really, it's the fact that the person is disabled that is emphasized over what they achieved. And it also often leads to comments like, this is so inspiring, and now I have no excuses, and I'm going to go live my best life because you didn't really inspired me. And disabled people aren't out there doing these things to inspire you to live your best life. We're just trying to do the things that everyone else is out there doing. So, you know, as people who work in outdoor recreation, really using your privilege to advocate for accessibility after learning from other disabled folks is really important. You know, so doing things like, you know, you calling a park and asking for their accessibility information, making information more widely available, making gear available, and things like that. So I think that's all I have. I think we have a few minutes left for Q&A.
Yes, here I am. Okay. Yes, we definitely do. So if folks wanted to use down below, there's a Q&A function. You can ask questions and I will answer, or I will ask them out loud for Syren. You're also welcome to use the chat if that's easier for you. I know what I have learned as a Zoom host, you need to give an awkwardly long amount of time for people to ask questions while we kind of sit and wait. So don't be shy, and feel free to take your time and think about it. I have oh, here we have one. Okay. How widely used is the spoon system? Is that something that is being spread across different organizations to help standardize?
Yeah, so that's a great question. It's something that I actually get a lot of requests to use across other organizations. What I'm doing right now, I have learned that if I just give people permission to use the spoon rating system, it often ends up getting used incorrectly because there's a lot more that goes into it than just what's in that basic guide. So I'm actually working on a training program to teach people how to do trail assessments and how to use that information and how that is then applied to the guide.
Awesome, thank you. We have another one. What advice do you have for someone who is wanting to be an advocate for disability inclusion in the outdoors?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think, of course, following disabled folks in the outdoors, learning from their social media, from websites and blogs. There's a lot of us that are out here doing this work. So learning from them and studying things like the ADA accessibility guidelines and ABA accessibility guidelines and understanding what is included in all of that and what is not included, because in a lot of ways, those are really limited. Yeah.
Awesome. And I'm kind of curious, Syren, when you talked about the inspiration porn, and I think we sometimes see that a lot in advertising too, is like tokenism, which, I work for a nonprofit that provides wilderness experiences for people, and our mission is around accessibility and inclusion. How I find that the balancing kind of sharing incredible stories without tokenizing is really challenging. Do you have any kind of commentary or advice on how we kind of navigate that as an organization of people who don't have disabilities, maybe necessarily?
Yeah, I think allowing the disabled person to tell the story themselves and use their own words and their own language for the experience, and not highlighting, for example, I see a lot of sports organizations that bring non-disabled people and disabled people together to be able to enjoy the outdoors and have these experiences. But then when they're telling those stories, they often center the experience of the non-disabled people who were out there doing this really wonderful thing and helping this person accomplish this thing, which is not the story that needs to be told. It's, about the disabled folks. So.
Awesome, thank you. What are some of your favorite hikes in the Pacific Northwest, or what would you say are some of, for your like go-to places that you like to go?
It's always such a hard question. There's a lot of really amazing places out here, thankfully. So for me, the coast is a really amazing place. That's where I go, where I really need to recharge. And I'm really lucky to be in this place where I have access to temperate rainforest and mountains and ocean and all of that within just a short distance. So yeah.
Well, that sounds amazing. I've never been there, I've been to, I guess, Seattle, but that's the most like Pacific Northwest experience I've ever had. So I'm excited to go someday. We have another question from the group. I work for a conservation corps, and I'm always trying to find ways to make the outdoors more accessible. Sometimes I find places that say they are accessible, but in reality, they are nowhere close. How can I change this?
Contacting the land managers of that place and expressing your concerns, asking about accessibility, what improvements are being made, suggesting improvements to them. I think a lot of times, I have conversations with a lot of land managers who just think no one is out there using those spaces. So it's not a priority for them, or they don't have anyone to talk to about making those changes. So, and of course, anytime you're doing that work, the wheels turn really slowly, right? So it can take a long time for there to actually be change made. But yeah, just starting those conversations is important.
Thank you. One thing that I found the most fascinating about your presentation too is sort of that evolution of language and terms. And, I think we just so often learn from each other or learn from social media or learn from things. And I feel like there is rarely ever kind of like an official, like, this is how you should speak about this, or these are the words to use with this. Which is one reason why I really love your spoon theory too, because it does kind of create a cohesive perspective of ways that we can kind of interact with each other, interact with different concepts that is sort of universalized. Mm-hmm. What do you see as like what do you think it will take for when it comes to using person first language or using identity first language to really be more normalized across society? Is it something that has to be more formalized, like this is the defined term accepted by this organization? Or do you think the movement really will come from society and social media and relationships and people interacting with each other?
Yeah, I think it will really come from the community and interacting with one another. And, of course, I'm just one person sharing my experience and my perspectives. And, if you talk to another disabled person, they'll have a different idea about language. But I think that's one of the really amazing things about it. I think another thing that is necessary is for non-disabled organizations and people and all of that to take a step back and stop trying to drive the conversation about language, because that's where a lot of this has come from. So, yeah.
That's great. Thank you. Got quite a few questions coming through now. We have one: is this work being done by anyone in the Twin Cities already? Someplace I could start as a disabled lover of the outdoors. I would like to do a quick plug for Wilderness Inquiry. We are a nonprofit based in the Twin Cities, and we do work with people with disabilities and of all identities and backgrounds. That's part of our mission. I don't know, Syren, if you're familiar with any other Twin Cities since you're Pacific Coast based, but we also have lots of connections with other organizations too. So feel free to connect with Wilderness Inquiry if you have more questions about local opportunities. Yeah, I don't know, Syren, if you have anything else to add.
Yeah, I don't personally, but I have actually had a lot of inquiries from that region, and my plan is to start Disabled Hikers chapters in the next couple of years. So I have a feeling that may be kind of one of the first areas we go to.
That's awesome. I didn't know. That's really cool. I love that there's this like cross-continent connection going on.
Mm-hmm.
Very cool. We have another question here. Tips on how to deal with people who assume you can't do things or a particular trail because of your disability and blatantly tell you. Do you educate them? Do you ignore them and try anyways?
Well, of course, it depends on who it is, right? Like if I'm at a park and a ranger is telling me, oh, you can't do that trail, then I'm going to ask them specifically why they think I can't, and then explain my own needs and all of that. If it's just some random person on the internet, which happens a lot, I have personally gotten better at just ignoring them, but that takes a lot of practice for sure. It still stings sometimes. Yeah.
Great. Couple more. Do you have any advice for disabled hikers who are trying to learn what their outdoor access needs are?
Yeah, I think finding someone you are comfortable going out with who will understand your needs and be with you as you kind of explore this and learn what you can do, what your body can do is really important. I didn't necessarily have that either, and honestly I took a lot of risks early on that I probably shouldn't have, but it gave me the opportunity to learn. So yeah, just getting out there in whatever way you can and just trying things.
Great. Here's another one. Is there a way to schedule either one of y'all to do a presentation for a group of young adults that work in the outdoors?
Yeah, I do presentations, consultations, all that stuff.
Great. Yeah, I emailed Syren and we connected right away and planned this. So feel free to reach out to Syren, contact info here. Otherwise, you can connect with Wilderness Inquiry and we can connect you to if you're interested in that. It sounds great. Any other questions or comments or discussions or anything? Don't be shy. Syren, have you ever been to Minnesota?
No, I don't think so. Yeah.
Well, if you ever want to come visit, we would love to meet you in person. We're mostly a paddling organization, so if you're ever interested in doing a paddling trip, we'd love to have you.
Awesome.
We have another question in the Q&A. Do you plan to write more books or guides on additional areas?
Yes. Yeah, hopefully. The idea is that this will be the first in a series. It's really kind of a groundbreaking, first of its kind book, so no pressure on me at all. Yeah, so the idea is, to do other places after this.
Cool. And are you, so you mentioned you're working with Olympic National Park. Do you have plans to work with other national parks too? Or is that kind of the goal to partner with many more?
Yeah, I'm also partnering with Washington State Parks, Oregon Tourism Board, Mount Rainier, other parks. So, yeah.
Cool. That's awesome. We've got a couple just thanks for taking the time to help us be a more welcoming community. Any other questions or comments from the group? Right. Well, this has been excellent, Syren. Thank you so much for joining us. Oh, we've got another one. Great. Is there any activity in the outdoors that you constantly come across that people aren't making an effort to make more accessible?
All of it. Yeah, I think, yeah, that's kind of a hard question. Because I do think in a lot of ways, it really depends. Some are doing better than others. For example, I think like adaptive sports has been kind of the driving force behind disability in the outdoors for a long time. So things like skiing and there's a lot about winter sports and things like that that are doing a pretty good job about disability inclusion. But in a lot of ways, a lot of the other forms of recreation are still really lacking. So.
We'll give people a few more minutes then if they have any more last minute questions. Oh, we do have some more thank yous. This has been lovely. Thanks for your helpful context to use for thoughtful understanding and planning. Thanks again. Yeah, I also just thank you so much for joining us, Syren. We're so excited to have you on the Inquiry series. I really hope this is the start of more conversations with you in the future, especially as I know we grow here in the Twin Cities as a more inclusive outdoor community, and our organization as well. I think we could really use more thoughtful insight and guidance from experts like you. So I really appreciate you taking the time to be here. We have another comment. Thank you for walking the talk and not ignoring access needs. Getting captions and audio descriptions is so important. Thank you so much for being being accessible with your presentations and everything as well. Yeah. And I think if that's it from the group, we'll sign off a few minutes early here this evening. And again, if you have more questions for Syren or for Wilderness Inquiry, feel free to reach out to Syren directly or pass them through us, and we'd be happy to connect you. Otherwise, thank you all so much for joining us this evening, and we will hope to see you at next month's inquiry series with Kareem Neal. Otherwise, take care, everybody. Have a great evening, and we'll see you again soon.
Great. Thank you, everyone.